In this video, we revisit the ghost towns that were once roaring boomtowns and see what remains of them today. Bodie, California. The gold camp that exploded out of the eastern Sierra after a rich strike, swelling by 1880 to as many as 10,000 people, 2,000 buildings, 65 saloons, and a main street so violent it earned a reputation as the wickedest town in the West. The gold thinning, the miners drifting away, fires sweeping through the wooden town in the early 20th century until only a fraction survived. Taken over by the state of California in 1962 and held ever since in a condition officials call arrested decay, around 110 weathered buildings preserved exactly as they were left, dishes still on tables, goods still on store shelves, nothing restored and nothing allowed to fall. The wickedest town in the West, frozen mid-collapse, a museum of abandonment that the state pays to keep from finishing. Kolmanskop, Namibia. The diamond town that erupted from the desert after a railway worker found a glittering stone in the sand in 1908. The German colonists building a town with a ballroom, a theater, a hospital that owned the first X-ray machine in the southern hemisphere, an ice factory, and a tram, importing champagne and caviar to the edge of the Namib. The diamonds running out and richer fields opening to the south, the town abandoned by 1956 and surrendered to the dunes. Now the sand pours through the doorways and fills the grand rooms waist deep, the desert reclaiming the houses room by room, tourists wading through drifts in ballrooms that once echoed with German opera, the richest little town in Africa drowning, slowly, in the same sand that made it. Rhyolite, Nevada, the gold town that sprang up near Death Valley after a 1904 strike, racing within 3 years to a population of perhaps 8,000, with concrete office blocks, an opera house, electric light, and a stock exchange, all built on the promise of a mountain of ore. The financial panic of 1907 strangling the credit that fed it, the mines closing almost as fast as they opened, the town all but empty by 1916. The remains standing in the desert sun, the broken facade of the 3-story Cook Bank, the railroad depot, and the famous bottle house built from 50,000 beer bottles by a miner with more glass than lumber. A city that lived barely a decade, leaving ruins that have now stood empty for over 100 years, far longer than anyone ever lived in them. Hashima Island, Japan. The undersea coal mining island off Nagasaki, nicknamed Battleship Island for its silhouette, where Mitsubishi packed more than 5,000 workers and their families onto a concrete slab smaller than 15 acres, building Japan's first large reinforced concrete apartment blocks and creating, at its peak, one of the most densely populated places ever to exist on Earth. The coal giving way to oil, the mine closing in 1974, and the entire population leaving within months, the island emptied almost overnight. Now a crumbling gray maze of collapsing apartment towers open to limited boat tours, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and a film backdrop for a world's end. The most crowded place humans ever built, abandoned so completely that the sea wind moves through thousands of empty rooms. Pyramiden, Svalbard, Norway. The Soviet coal mining town carved into the Arctic above the 80th parallel, a model socialist settlement with a cultural palace, a swimming pool, a grand piano shipped to the top of the world, and the northernmost statue of Lenin on the planet, home to around 1,000 people. Abandoned by Russia in 1998 when the mine became unprofitable, the residents leaving and the cold, dry Arctic air preserving everything they left, the piano still in the hall, Lenin still gazing over the empty square, now reached by boat or snowmobile from Longyearbyen, A single hotel reopened to serve the tourists who come to see a Soviet town frozen exactly at the moment the Soviet Union itself disappeared. Kennecott, Alaska. The copper boomtown built deep in the Wrangell Mountains after the discovery of one of the richest copper deposits ever found. A self-contained company town of red-painted mill buildings, a hospital, a school, and a recreation hall reached only by a railway blasted through glaciers and gorges. The copper exhausted by 1938, the company pulling out and the last train leaving, the town simply locked and abandoned in the wilderness. Now the centerpiece of Wrangell St. Elias National Park, the towering red mill still standing 14 stories against the mountainside, preserved by the dry cold and the remoteness that made it so hard to build in the first place. The richest copper camp in the world ending as the most photographed ruin in the largest national park in America. Humberstone, Chile. The saltpeter town that thrived in the bone-dry Atacama Desert when the world depended on Chilean nitrate for fertilizer and explosives. A company town with a theater, a swimming pool cast from a shipwrecked iron hull, and a thriving community pulled from nothing in the driest desert on Earth. Destroyed by chemistry when German scientists learned to synthesize nitrogen from the air, making the desert mines worthless almost overnight. The town abandoned by 1960. Preserved by the rainless climate and named a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The theater seats still in rows, the rusting machinery still standing, a monument to an entire industry that an invention erased. Sewell, Chile. The city of stairs, the copper mining town clinging to a 60-degree Andean slope above the world's largest underground copper mine, too steep for a single road, its brightly painted buildings connected entirely by staircases, home to as many as 15,000 people. The mining company eventually relocating the residents down the mountain and dismantling much of the town through the 1970s, leaving a core of the painted buildings clinging to the cliff. Now a UNESCO site reached by tour, a vertical ghost town of green and yellow and red staircases climbing into the thin Andean air, empty of the workers who once raced up and down them. Jerome, Arizona. The copper camp that clung to the side of Cleopatra Hill and grew into a billion-dollar mining town of 15,000 people, so rowdy it was once called the wickedest town in the West, and so undermined by blasting that buildings literally slid downhill. The mines closing in 1953 and the population collapsing to fewer than 100, the town nearly dying completely. Then a second life, rediscovered by artists and hippies who bought the empty buildings for almost nothing, turning the ghost town into a thriving colony of galleries, wineries, and haunted hotel tourism. The town that died as a mining camp and came back as an art town, one of the rare ghosts on this list to refill its own streets. Goldfield, Nevada. The gold strike of 1902 that grew within 5 years into the largest city in Nevada, a place of 20,000 people with grand hotels, a stock exchange, and a championship prize fight staged to put it on the map. The richest ore playing out, a flood and then a catastrophic fire in the 1920s burning much of the town, the population draining away to a few hundred. The magnificent Goldfield Hotel still standing empty on the main street, the courthouse still in use, a near-deserted town sitting on a highway through the desert, once the biggest city in the state, now a scattering of survivors among the ruins of its own ambition, Pichur, Oklahoma. The lead and zinc town that helped supply the bullets for 2 world wars, surrounded by mountainous gray piles of toxic mining waste the locals called chat, mountains children once sledded down without knowing they were poison. The ground beneath the town honeycombed by mining and at risk of collapse, the soil and water laced with lead, a federal Superfund buyout emptying the town through the 2000s before a tornado tore through what was left. Officially dissolved, the streets still laid out beneath the toxic gray dunes, a handful of holdouts refusing to leave a town the government declared too dangerous to exist. The Boomtown that armed a nation poisoned by the very ore that made it rich. Wittenoom, Western Australia. The blue asbestos town in the remote Pilbara that mined the deadliest mineral on Earth from the 1930s until 1966. The crocitolite dust that seeded fatal cancers in the lungs of the miners and their families decades later. The tailings spread through the town, and even used to pave its streets and playgrounds. Judged so dangerously contaminated that the government took the extraordinary step of erasing it, cutting the power, closing the roads, removing it from official maps, and tearing down the road signs so travelers could not find it. The most actively unremembered place in Australia, a town the state deleted because the only safe thing to do with it was to pretend it had never been there. Gwalia, Western Australia. The gold town beside the Sons of Gwalia mine, managed in its early days by a young American engineer named Herbert Hoover before he became President of the United States. A desert community of immigrant miners that thrived for over half a century. The mine closing suddenly in 1963, and the residents leaving so quickly, most by the next train, that they left furniture, clothes, and food behind in their tin and hessian cottages. Now preserved as an open-air museum, the miners' shacks frozen with their belongings still inside, Hoover House standing above it as a guest house, a town abandoned in a single weekend, kept exactly as that weekend left it. Plymouth, Montserrat. The capital of a Caribbean island, a Georgian colonial town of pastel buildings, until the Soufriere Hills volcano roared back to life in 1995, and, over the following 2 years, buried Plymouth under pyroclastic flows and meters of ash, killing those who lingered and driving most of the island's population away for good. The city abandoned inside an exclusion zone, its rooftops poking from the gray ash like a Caribbean Pompeii, still legally the capital of Montserrat, though no one can live there. The only ghost capital in the world, a functioning country's official seat of government, entombed and uninhabitable, governed from a town built somewhere safer. Varosha, Famagusta, Cyprus. The glittering beach resort that in the early 1970s was one of the most fashionable destinations in the Mediterranean, its high-rise hotels lining a golden shore where film stars and the international jet set came to be seen. Emptied in a single day when the Turkish invasion of 1974 sent its Greek Cypriot residents fleeing, the Turkish military fencing the entire district off and freezing it untouched for nearly half a century, the hotels decaying, the boutiques still displaying the fashions of 1974 behind shattered glass. Partially reopened to visitors in 2020, tourists now cycling past the rotting towers of a resort that stopped on a single summer afternoon and never started again. Villa Epiquén, Argentina. The lakeside spa town that drew tens of thousands of visitors to bathe in its salt-rich waters. A resort of hotels and guest houses on the shore of a salt lake. Destroyed in 1985 when a rare weather event and a failing embankment sent the lake pouring over the town, submerging it under as much as 10 meters of salt water, the entire resort lost beneath the surface for 25 years. The water slowly receding after 2009 to reveal a bleached and skeletal ruin, dead trees and crumbling staircases caked white with salt, and a single old man, Pablo Novak, who moved back to live alone among the bones of the town where he was born. Craco, Italy. The medieval hill town in the south, its stone houses and watchtower stacked dramatically on a clay ridge for nearly 1,000 years, until landslides, an earthquake, and the unstable ground beneath it forced the residents to abandon it through the second half of the 20th century. The empty town left standing on its crumbling hill, too fragile to inhabit and too striking to demolish, now a fenced ruin entered only with a guide and a hard hat. A skyline of empty medieval towers that has become one of Italy's most filmed locations, a real ghost town playing imaginary ones for the cameras. Kayaköy, Turkey. The Greek Orthodox town on a hillside above the coast, home to thousands until the 1923 population exchange between Greece and Turkey emptied it in a single stroke of diplomacy. Its inhabitants sent to Greece and the houses left behind never substantially resettled. Around 350 roofless stone houses and 2 churches remain on the slope, a hollow town preserved as a museum village and a monument to the moment 2 nations decided who belonged where. An entire community erased not by gold running out or a volcano erupting, but by a line drawn on a treaty. Calico, California. The silver town that boomed in the 1880s in the Mojave, named for the colorful hills around it. Home to over 1,000 people and a roaring main street, until the silver price collapsed and the mines closed by the 1890s, the town emptying within a few years. Bought decades later by Walter Knott of Knott's Berry Farm, who restored and partly rebuilt it, donating it to the county as a tourist attraction. Now a regional park where visitors stroll a reconstructed main street, a real ghost town turned into a polished version of itself, half history and half souvenir. Old Cahaba, Alabama. The river town that served as the first capital of Alabama in the 1820s, a planned city at the meeting of 2 rivers, abandoned as the capital when floods made its location untenable, and finished off by the decline that followed the Civil War. The buildings dismantled or collapsed, the streets returning to forest, leaving brick columns and empty avenues standing among the trees. Now an archaeological park, the ghost of a state capital reduced to a grid of paths through the woods. The most important town in early Alabama vanished so thoroughly that visitors walk its main street without realizing it was ever there. Thurmond, West Virginia, the coal and railroad town deep in the New River Gorge that had no road in or out, reached only by the tracks. A prosperous hub in the early 20th century where the railroad moved more freight tonnage than Cincinnati, and the town's hotels and saloons roared with coal money. Killed by the shift from steam to diesel, which no longer needed the water and coal stops that gave the town its purpose, the population draining to almost nothing. Now home to a literal handful of residents inside New River Gorge National Park, the restored depot serving as a visitor center, a once booming railroad town with fewer people than a single passenger car once carried. Cerro Gordo, California. The silver and lead mine high above the Owens Valley that helped build early Los Angeles, sending down the bullion that financed a growing city before the ore ran thin and the town emptied into a wind-blown collection of cabins on a remote peak. Bought by new owners in 2018 who set out to restore it and reopen it as a remote retreat, only to watch its historic American hotel burn to the ground in 2020 before they could finish, then begin rebuilding it from old photographs. A ghost town in the middle of a second life, its past and its future both unfinished on the same mountaintop. Belchite, Spain. The town in Aragon that was fought over so ferociously during the Spanish Civil War in 1937 that the battle left it a shattered ruin of collapsed churches and bullet-pocked walls. The dictator Franco choosing not to rebuild it but to leave the ruins standing as a propaganda monument to the destruction, constructing a new town beside it for the survivors. The old town still standing empty, its broken bell tower and skeletal streets preserved as a wound. One ghost town created deliberately as a warning, while its replacement was built next door. Bombay Beach, California. The resort town on the shore of the Salton Sea, an accidental inland sea that in the 1950s and 1960s became a glamorous desert getaway with marinas, yacht clubs, and celebrity visitors. The boom built on a body of water nobody had planned to exist. The sea growing saltier and more toxic as it shrank, the fish dying in vast die-offs, the resorts abandoned to the encroaching salt and the smell, the town left to rot on a poisoned shore, now partly reborn as an unlikely art colony, installations rising among the ruined trailers, a dead resort decorated by the artists who moved into its corpse. Barkerville, British Columbia, Canada. The Caribou Gold Rush town that in the 1860s was reputedly one of the largest settlements on the west coast of North America north of San Francisco, a wild frontier boomtown built almost overnight in the mountains of British Columbia. Declining as the easy gold gave out, dwindling toward abandonment until the province restored it as a heritage site, rebuilding and preserving over 100 buildings. Now a living history town where costumed interpreters work the shops in summer, a ghost town brought deliberately back to a kind of staged life. The gold rush replayed for visitors each season. Kangbashi, Ordos, Inner Mongolia, China. The newest kind of ghost town and the strangest, a gleaming modern city district built during a coal boom in the 2000s, with grand plazas, museums, and apartment towers for 1 million people who never arrived. The most famous of China's so-called ghost cities, finished and empty at the same time. Slowly filling in the years since as schools and government offices drew residents in, a town that was abandoned before anyone ever lived there now cautiously coming to life. The ghost town in reverse, built complete and waiting for its boom, the opposite of every other place on this list, which boomed first and emptied after.